when we'll talk about these things. So do excuse other noise because there's a dog. So basically, now if you have been paying attention to the questions of the maybe the last 3 years or last 4 years, you would notice that there is a particular trend that one can see in both the question 7 and question 8, that is short story questions and the poetry questions. You no longer get questions on a single short story or a single poem, but what you get is uh, questions that make you think about patterns in these short stories or in these poems that you have been studying for the last 2 years before you go for the exam. So one of the few things that you have to do when you get ready for the exam or when you're studying for the exam is to think about short stories or think about poems that you learn in class, not as individual poems or individual short stories, but as um, creative work that have more connections to the other things that you study, that you read in your classroom. That is the first thing that that one has to do when one is preparing for the exam. I think that eases the preparation um, drastically, to put it simply. So, how do we do this now? It's easier said than done, obviously. You study short stories individually. You would look at a short story, you would study the short story. So, for example, you would be studying Evelyn by James Joyce. So you would read the short story, you would find, you would analyze the character, you would analyze Evelyn's character, you would talk about what are the reasons for her behavior, why did she not go with Frank when Frank offers her a future of love and affection, why does she want to stay back in Dublin, which is dreary and which is bleak and there is no future for her. So all these things you study individually. Like, you study that short story, you talk about this particular character. But after you have studied all your short stories, there's 6, I think, short stories. So once you have finished studying all these short stories, what you can do is you can think about other female characters who may have had the same kind of trajectory, the same kind of life that in the short stories that you have studied. So, for example, if you are studying Evelyn, if you have studied Evelyn, ideally you should have studied Evelyn by now, then you would realize, there is another character similar to Evelyn, but located in a different country, within a different socio-political environment, but who undergoes the same kind of, or who faces the same kind of challenges as Evelyn. Who's the character? If you can tell me, you can put it in chat. If you want to, obviously, I don't know how interactive this forum is, but can someone give me a name for the character whom you think might be facing the same challenges as Evelyn? Okay, I'm assuming the platform is, no one is typing. So to save time, I will give the answer to my question, but that would be Akunna from the short story by Chimamanda Adichie, where you see, someone has put up their hand, I suppose. I'm sorry, I don't know how this forum works, but yes, someone put up their hand and there must have been an answer. So, So literally, so you see, Akunna has the same, similar challenges, not the same challenges. Akunna doesn't have a promise that she has to keep to her dead mother, or Akunna is not being suppressed by her religious beliefs. But Akunna is also trying to work against the social conventions or the expectations that are there about this particular young woman from Nigeria. So now that is the kind of patterns that one has to see when one is studying. Um, Someone's asking something. Rasika would know how to give answers to these things. No, this is asking me. Uh, can we get the recording of today's session? I don't know. I am.
Madam, it will be on YouTube also, madam.
Okay, thank you, Rasika. I'm sorry, I don't know answers to these things. Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, so to get back to where I was, so if you can see patterns like this about certain characters, it will be easier for you to answer the questions that are there in your short story questions in the short story section of the paper, or in the poetry section of the paper. So I'll talk about the poetry in a bit, but let me talk about short stories. So the first thing that one has to do is to see the pattern. So when you are studying the short stories, when you're revising for the exam, think about putting all of these short stories together and see what are the themes, or what are the um, interests that you can see in these short stories. So for example, you see female identity. Um, Repeatedly, like, female here female identity is like someone trying to establish their identity. So it can be Akunna trying to establish her identity, her individuality. It can be Evelyn, who tries but does not necessarily follow through to achieving this individual identity. Or it can be even Mrs. Das, who there is a moment of rebellion that we get to hear about Mrs. Das from Interpreter of Melodies, or then she does not necessarily follow through the rebellion that she promises in her story. So see these kind of patterns, see these kind of similarities, so that it is easier for you when you go to the exam to answer questions like discuss the importance of conversations. This is from last year's paper. This is 2020, the short story question. The first question says, discuss the importance of conversations in 3 short stories in your syllabus, focusing specifically on how they move the plot forward and how they are used as narrative technique. So what we can see, so when you have this thing, the importance of conversations, now don't think about conversation as in conversation with only someone else. It can be someone talking to themselves, like in the case of Cat in the Rain, because most of the time you see this American wife speaking to herself, because the husband does not necessarily respond to her, so she's talking to herself, but that is still considered conversation. So she's having a conversation with herself. And then you have, so one of the biggest confusions when you answer that kind of question is, so where are the short stories where you can see conversations? You have short stories where you have conversations, because in what do you call, in your I'm sorry, this subject is English 73. I will not respond to the chat. So when you then you have conversations in Evelyn, where Evelyn is thinking to herself. Evelyn is having this internal conversation in her head. She's having an internal monologue. And then you have Akunna, where you have a very strong internal monologue going on, and she's debating with herself. She's conversing with herself to come to certain conclusions, certain interpretations about certain things. So now that is half the question. The importance of conversations in your short stories. And then you have the second part of the question, which most of the candidates do overlook in their excitement or in their hurry to write the answer. The second part of the question is, how do these conversations move the plot forward? Now, don't think that when you have to answer a question, you have to answer always in affirmative. You don't have to always agree with the question. You can also say there are conversations in these particular short stories, but they do not contribute to moving the plot forward. And but because these conversations do not contribute in moving the plot forward, it is used as a narrative technique to show the stagnation or the stagnant quality of the character or the society or things like that. So you have to manipulate what you know to answer the question. I know this is very difficult under exam conditions. Now, that is exactly why one has to have a very clear picture of what one is going to do when one goes to the exam. So there are other questions like the second question in that short story section from the same paper, 2020 A-level. Explore how love is used as a theme in 2 short stories by male writers. Now, that's a fairly straightforward question. How is love used as a theme? So out of your 6 short stories, you have Evelyn, which uses love as a theme. You have Cat in the Rain, which uses love as a theme. Then you have Interpreter of Melodies, which uses love as a theme. You have even Thing Around Your Neck, which uses love or the lack of it as a theme. So obviously you have enough short stories where love is used as a theme. Now comes the problematic part of the question by male writers. Now you have to really think about who wrote these short stories. So Evelyn obviously is written by a male writer, James Joyce is a man, so that is fine. Then you can think about Cat in the Rain, which is written by Hemingway, which actually talks about love in the text, or the lack of it, or the lack of reciprocity, how the love that the wife needs is not given to her by the American husband. So you can talk about those things. So that's why I said when you talk about these, when you answer these questions, don't think that you have to always say yes to the question. You can also negate, or you can also argue against what the question proposes. Now, can't hear anything. Can people not hear me, or is it just one person who cannot hear me? Rasika?
Your voice is very clear, ma'am. No worries.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I'm just going through the chat just to see what people have. Okay. Okay, so there was a very good question from someone who says, I always lose marks when I'm trying to expand the answer. And yeah, the teacher tells this particular person that the information is not sufficient. Yes, because it can be the case, because what happens is, okay, so you have a point to prove. then you need to bring in evidence from the short story. So let me talk about how to expand the answer, how to build the answer. Give me a minute. I'm going to share my screen and show you something that I've done, which you can do. Now, this is not this is not a God-given answer. Okay, this is something that I've done just because I wanted to show you something. Now, this is something that is that I sort of created for me to see the common themes of each of the short stories. So I've thought about certain themes. I have thought about male dominance or patriarchy, marriage, love, tradition and culture, influence of religion, identity, female subjugation, alienation, servitude and power, hypocrisy, communication as themes. There's more themes that you can, I mean, there's more than this that you can write as themes. But if you do this very simple exercise, you realize that you can see certain themes being repeated in almost all the short stories. Or you can see overlaps of these themes in certain selected short stories. And now, if you have a grid like this, maybe this is how I work, okay? So you don't have to do the same thing, but have a mechanism where you can see or where you can visually see the themes being put into one sheet of paper. So grids are how I work, but then you can have a drawing, you can have one of those mind maps, you can have these things where you connect it to the themes, you can draw a map like thing, whatever. But then if you see these themes being repeated visually, that allows you to see the common themes that are repeated in these short stories. And if you know these things, to get back to my first point of seeing patterns in the short stories, it's very easy for you when you go into the exam to answer questions like short stories that talk about the theme of love. Then you know, okay, these short stories talk about love, but out of these short stories, only two are written by male. So half of your thinking time, planning time, um, is saved because you already know what you are going to talk about. Because sometimes what you see is students, they have started writing the answer, halfway through they remember certain things, and that is when you start adding this information into your already existing answer. Then of course the answer doesn't look very planned or very clear. I'm gonna stop sharing the screen. So now that is part of how you see the patterns. Now, the same thing can be done with poetry as well, because when you're writing the long answer, we do expect candidates to see, to not only know individual poems, individual poets, but also to know the patterns, the common themes, the clusters that the poems can fall into in the poetry that they read. So you can have poems where you cluster them as war poems. You cluster them as poems about um, women. You can cluster them as poems about social injustice. You can cluster them as poems about identity, individuality. You can cluster them as poems about nature. You can decide which cluster these poems belong to, but also see that from nature cluster, you may have a poem that talks about nature in a very overt manner. Maybe the main theme is nature, but there might be references to identity. There might be references to independence. There might be references to individuality. There might be references to social practices. So then that nature poem can also have a theme that falls into these categories. So don't only cluster them into larger themes, but also see how you can connect these things across. So again, having something visual helps you. when you're revising, when it's the last day before the exam, it's very easy to see a picture and then go into the exam without any trouble. Now, to get back to some of the questions that are there about expanding the answer or writing the answer. Now, of course, you go into the exam knowing how to write an answer. You have practiced, you have studied, you know your short stories, you know your poems. In the marking key, which is available on the Department of Examinations website, I'm told, there are various categories where certain marks are allocated. So you do have a category called understanding and responding to the question. So to get that mark, the allocated mark for that particular section, the candidate needs to understand the question and respond to the question. So if the question is asking you to talk about choice in 3 short stories, one of the first things that an examiner would do is to look at how the candidate has seen or candidate has interpreted choice in 3 short stories. So you have to have 3 examples, and you have to have elaborated how choice is used in these short, or like what is the choice that these particular short stories talk about. So there you get that mark if you have addressed that particular part. Then, of course, how much do you know about this particular short story? Now, that is the question that someone asked about expanding the answer. Now, you can't just say like, okay, ABC short stories use choice as a platform, choice in the short stories, lack of choice or choice. Like I told you before, you don't have to always do the positive interpretation. You can always say lack of choice is also there. Then you can, so these are there, and you can't just move away from that. So when you say Evelyn demonstrates lack of choice available to this young girl, then you have to demonstrate how Evelyn has no choice in the matter of her going or her staying, that she is conditioned by her society, therefore she doesn't have a choice. So you have to demonstrate that. To demonstrate that, you have to bring in examples from the short story or the poem that you're talking about. So you have to tell us, maybe like, you can use quotations. There is no maximum or a minimum number of quotations that one can use. The only advice I can give you is, if you're using a quotation, use the quotation, as in, you can't just write a word. You can't just, write a phrase and go away. Like you can't just say things like, Evelyn sat staring at the sea. That's a quote. I know this is not a quotation. I'm just inventing quotations here. Now, imagine that's a quotation. You can't just put it there and then go on discussing whatever you were discussing. You have to demonstrate how that quotation is important in your answer, important to prove the point that you're arguing. So when you are using quotations, use them properly in your answer. Don't just write them with a different color. I mean, candidates are really, really smart. They use different colors for quotations, which is very easy on the eye to an examiner. But that doesn't mean that they're going to like count the number of quotations and say, oh, brilliant, there's like 5 quotations, therefore you get the full marks. No, there is no maximum or minimum number of quotations prescribed. You can write, if you remember, quote. If you don't remember, paraphrase. That is fine. You don't have to always remember the exact line. If you don't remember, you can just explain. You can just paraphrase. You can just give us a description of that particular situation. So instead of saying that So I don't remember the quotation where Evelyn is debating about going with Frank and staying back in Dublin. So I would just say, in this particular incident where Evelyn is debating about going away with Frank or staying back in Dublin, she remembers her mother's last words. I'm not using a quotation, but I'm using a paraphrase. I'm just describing that particular um, incident. So that still shows the examiner that you know what the story is all about. So that is expanding, that is giving information to support your argument. So you have started arguing, saying that there is lack of choice in Evelyn, the short story, and how this character called Evelyn is conditioned by her society, therefore she doesn't have a choice. So you're proving it by giving certain examples. And then of course you have to write in a proper way. You have to have a very short introduction, you have to argue your points, and you have to have a very short conclusion. So that is the structure of your answer. So all these things are taken into consideration. But where you get the most marks according to the marking scheme is where you argue in relation to the question. So you either argue and say that, yes, these three short stories use conversation to move the plot forward, and you argue to say that there is conversation in the thing around your neck, there's conversation in interpreter of melodies, there's conversation in everyday use, and these conversations help the short story to move forward, and these conversations reveal new information for the readers or for the audience. So therefore, that is used as a narrative technique to move the plot forward. So once again, you're done. You have argued, and therefore, and to argue those points, you have given enough evidence. Now that is a decent answer, I would say. And then the way you use language, the way you use grammatically correct sentences, all these things matter in getting a higher mark. But what a lot of candidates, let's say, like, I think most of the time, this is not only A-level students, but I think a lot of students who write answers tend to do this. They read the question, they start answering without even thinking about the question. But if you take a minute and underline the most important words in the question, you have already decided how you're going to answer the question. Now, for example, there is a question. This is again from the 2020 paper. Identify the short story that, in your view, provides the best analysis of resistance to oppression. Now, the paper makes it easier for you by highlighting the words resistance to oppression. So you know that this is something that you have to focus on. And write a short introduction to the story highlighting this aspect. Okay. Note that you first need to justify your selection through a brief comparison with the other stories in your syllabus. Now, that is what a lot of people miss. You read the question, you would say, oh, identify the short story that in your view provides the best analysis of resistance to oppression. Fine. Most of the people, in their excitement, in their hurry, do not read the rest of the question. So resistance to oppression, you find in short stories. You can talk about Thing Around Your Neck as a short story that shows resistance to oppression. You can talk about Everyday Use as a short story that talks about resistance to oppression. You can do you can argue using any of these short stories. But the rest of the question is the most important part of the question. You have to write a short introduction highlighting this aspect of the short story, like how the short story brings out resistance to oppression. But before you do that, you have to justify why this particular short story is the best example for resistance to oppression. why this is the best analysis of resistance to oppression. Now, when you have these words like best or the most important, or these kind of superlatives, you have to understand that comes from comparing it with other things. You can't be the best if you are the only student in the class. You have to have at least two other people who perform at least marginally lower than you for you to become the best. So you have to understand, for you to say that this is the best analysis of resistance to oppression, you have to say Cat in the Rain is also about resisting oppression, but it doesn't really show you resistance to oppression in a strong manner, in a very believable manner, in a very, I would say, in a deep manner. The wife resists the husband and his oppression, which is not necessarily oppression, his lack of interest. Therefore, of course, it is not resistance to oppression. Then you can also think about action and reaction, and you can say Kusuma reacts to Lokunanda's oppression, and she resists Lokunanda's oppression by becoming an oppressor herself. But then it is not a good example of resistance to oppression. What Kusuma becomes another oppressor. She becomes another perpetrator of the same crime that Lokunanda has committed. Therefore, that is not also a good example of resistance to oppression. But in everyday use, you have this mama resisting Dee's oppression by standing up for herself and talking back to Dee and his desire to acquire all the the quilts and other things at Mama's place. Then you can argue. I mean, I'm not saying this is the only way you can argue, but you can argue and say there you see resisting oppression by standing up, by voicing their needs, and also taking ownership of the things such as the quilt, and establishing their identity by refusing to bow down to Dee and her newfound identity of African Americanness. Or you can say even there, that is not enough resistance. The Mama does not show enough resistance, but Akunna is the one who shows the most resistance to oppression, and then you can explain about it. So in that kind of an answer, the most important part of the answer is the second part, where you compare your choice against other short stories, at least 2 or 3 short stories, to prove that what you have chosen is the best example for resistance to oppression. And then what you do is you write a very short introduction to that particular short story that you have chosen. So don't think too much about this word introduction. What you do is you analyze that short story very in a very short in a very cursory manner. You would say like, okay, Akunna shows the most resistance to oppression because she does this and this and this, and the short story moves forward because of her actions, and therefore that is the best example to show that that is the resistance to oppression. Okay, I will take a minute to read the comments. Someone's asking, resistance to oppression, is it cruelty? No, resistance to oppression is you standing up. So oppression means you're being controlled by someone. So it can be Lokunanda, it can be the American Society for Akunna, it can be the husband not responding to the wife. You're being controlled, you're being oppressed. What you do is you resist, you stand up, you speak against, you become the person who does not bow down to this resistance, this oppression, but you resist it, but you stand against it. That is resistance to oppression. Okay, so let me. Someone's asking why action and reaction doesn't fall to the category of communication. I think it does fall into the category of communication, or this um, communication which is not necessarily truthful communication. I don't think Lokunanda communicates what she actually wants, and I don't think Kusuma communicates what she really wants. They both use religion as a fallback option, therefore they don't necessarily communicate, but they use a facade called religion to sort of filter their communication. Um, so in action and reaction, you do have communication or the lack of communication for that matter. And then someone's asking, female short story writers in the syllabus. There is Chimamanda Adichie, who wrote Thing Around Your Neck, Alice Walker, Everyday Use, Interpreter of Melodies by Jhumpa Lahiri, who's a female short story writer. Action and Reaction is by Chitra Fernando, again another female short story writer. So you have only two male writers in the syllabus, that is James Joyce, who wrote Evelyn, Hemingway, who wrote Cat in the Rain. Okay, what is the maximum number of quotation? Okay, I answered that. Embedded quotes, you can embed quotes, that's fine. What is the topic of the discussion? I was discussing short stories and poetry questions. Is using quotations mandatory? Well, you're studying literature. I suppose when you're, it's not like you don't have to directly quote, but you need to show evidence that you know the text. So whether you're paraphrasing or whether you're directly quoting, that doesn't matter, but you need to show, provide evidence to show that you know the text. Can we use color pens? I don't know those kind of stuff, but I've seen students using, if they're writing in blue, they use black to write quotations, which I don't advise, which I don't approve of. I think one pen is enough. Why bother, changing pens when you're under pressure to write an answer? Sorry, someone saying? Yeah, if you cannot remember the quotation, you can definitely write about the situation. You can use a paraphrase, of course. Sorry. How would you start writing the essay if they give you a particular theme to discuss with 3 poems? So you dive right in. You can say, for example, love is used in these short stories written by these writers who are male writers, and then you go on discussing. Don't waste a lot of time giving flowery introductions. I don't think those things matter at the exam, because what the examiners are essentially looking for is a solid answer. They're not looking for these flowery, fancy these things. Do we also have to stress a little as to why other? Yes, yeah, okay. Yes, you have to. I think I answered that question. I may have said the wrong name. Doesn't it matter if our analysis is too technical, or should it be simple? I don't understand the question. What do you mean by too technical? How, what do you exactly mean by saying that too technical? There is no order to say that you have to quote first and then elaborate, or elaborate and quote first. There is no order. Use it in a manner that is comfortable to you. So you people use the quotation first and elaborate. Some people elaborate and use the quotation to support that elaboration. That doesn't matter. There is no particular order. Using the first person, there is a divided opinion about this. I think Dinali would be the best one to answer that question.
You want me to butt in?
Yes, please. Yes.
Right. Using the first person can be done, but do it carefully, because I think what happens is it's okay to use it when you're presenting your own views. But at the same time, try not to use the first person or singular or plural in phrases like "as we all know," "as you know," as in idiomatic phrases like that. But occasionally to say "I firmly believe that," occasionally in a essay is good, particularly when you're in the essay in the paper too. Generally though, at this level we tend to discourage students from still tend to discourage students from using the first person, because the tendency is to overuse it. So it's better to learn not to use it at all, and then let it come in once you have mastered writing in the third person, but then let it come in very judiciously, as they say. Okay. So even if you use the first person, use it very carefully in a very limited way.
Okay. Okay. Thank you then. Thank you. I think most of these questions I've actually answered in my talk. Okay, this is a very good question. How many pages should we write for an answer? How many minutes do you get to write an answer is my question to you. You get 3 hours and you're expected to answer how many questions? 8 questions, no, if I'm not mistaken. So you have the context, you have 4 context questions, you have 4 long answers. You get 3 hours. You can't write pages and pages and pages unless you have really fast handwriting. So think about planning your answer. Like, this is where practice matters. And I think A level is about 75% preparation, 25% practice, if I'm not mistaken. You need to practice. So my advice to whoever who asked that question is, forget about the number of pages you need to write. Think about timing yourself. So when you get the paper, you should know this is the maximum amount of time I'm going to spend on short answers, the context answers. This is the maximum time I'm going to spend on one long answer. And be truthful to yourself. Be very strict on yourself and plan your answer. So when you're preparing for the exam, when you're answering questions to prepare for the exam, when you're practicing for the exam, time yourself. Have the timer next to you, have your phone or have a watch or whatever next to you, time your answer. And every time you write an answer, you should practice, you should reduce the time you spend, because initially we would spend about 1 hour on one answer, but that way you'll need about 6 hours to write that particular paper. You don't get that, you only get 3 hours. Therefore, make sure that you spend around 30 minutes, 40 minutes max on a long answer, because that is all you get. So if you write very fast, you will end up writing about 4 pages. If you don't write so fast, that's fine. That means you will still write a good answer because you have planned it. So you know this is what you're writing for this particular time. And if you know for 40 minutes, I have to write this answer. In 40 minutes, I have to write this answer, then you will know. Okay, so I know I will have to plan my introduction, I will have to plan my body, I will have to plan a conclusion. So don't think about number of pages. That never works, in my opinion. Yes, of course you can give your own ideas, but this is the only thing I expect from all my students. I suppose this is a tall order. But if you are going to tell me the sun rises from the west, prove it to me. Give me evidence from the book that you're talking about, from the poem, from the short story that you're talking about. If you're going to tell me Evelyn is a short story that talks about people and their habits, give me evidence to show that the short story talks about people and their habits. It is not a short story that talks about people and their habits because there's no evidence to prove it. If you're going to tell me Evelyn is a short story that talks about a woman and her desire to break away from the social conventions, give me evidence to prove that. You have enough evidence in the short story to prove that, because Evelyn is very confused. Evelyn is torn between her obligations to her family, her desire to find a life that will give her love and comfort. So there, you see, you have to prove what you're saying by giving evidence from the short story, from the poem, from the novel that you're studying. So that is the point where you give your opinion. You can give your opinion. You can have your own opinion about the short story, the poem, or the other text that you're talking about, but you have to prove it using that particular short story or that particular poem or those particular cluster of poems. Just remember that you can prove, if you can prove it, that's it. I think, can we underline our quotes? Why do you want to waste your time is my question. Leave it. It's a quotation. You put quotation marks, you're quoting, that's it. You don't need to underline. Do we have to describe the writer? No, just write the name of the writer. Just write, I mean, if the question asks you to describe the writer, describe the writer. But I don't think any of the questions so far have asked you to describe the writer. Don't. This is a competitive exam. This is a timed exam. Just remember those two facts. Timed exam means you are given a limited time to prove that you know enough about this subject. Therefore, you need to plan your answers even before you go to the exam. What happens at the exam is you actually get the question at the exam, but all the necessary information you have already planned while you're preparing for the exam, because this is a planned, timed exam, and this is a competitive exam. When you're facing a competitive exam, even a couple of minutes you gain by doing something in a more productive manner gives you more time to spend on writing the answer. So why would you want to spend time on underlining quotations and drawing flowers on the margins and describing the writer? You're not given, I've written exams where I was given 12 hours. There I had enough time to do this, but you're given 3 hours. You don't. Therefore, don't spend time on unnecessary things which does not necessarily give you marks at the exam. So keep those two things in mind. This is a timed exam. This is a competitive exam. Should we mix the short stories and write it? I don't understand the question. If someone can sort of clarify it for me. Any tips on timing? Practice. What is my opinion on? When you're writing these 3 short stories kind of thing. I think it's better if you organize it. You can organize it differently. You can either organize it thematically. So if all the 3 short stories have the same theme, you can talk about the theme in each short story. So you talk about love. You talk about love in Cat in the Rain. You talk about love in Evelyn. You talk about love in Action and Reaction. Or you can do it other way. You can say love is explored in these 3 short stories in these instances, and then you can either plan it thematically, or you can go from short story to short story. It depends on how you organize your information. So sometimes how I manage to do things is not the only way or the best way to do it. Okay, Dinali, I think I'm done. There's a lot of questions which I don't know. I'll try and answer in the chat box as I find them. And over to you, Din. Thank you very much.
Okay. I'm not sure if my video will come, but
It's there.
can you?
It's there. Can see.
Okay, right. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Shashi, for that. So now for the next 1 hour, we will be discussing the essay in paper 2. So let me share my screen. Okay, I hope you can see my screen. Right, I think some of the stuff that we talked about, that I'll be discussing here, Dr. Shashi has already touched on, particularly things about style and structuring, but we will look at the essay. I have a rather long session plan, but we'll see how it goes. And if you are feeling very tired, we will stop on time. Or otherwise, maybe we can take a few minutes extra, or maybe catch up on Wednesday. When we might have a bit of extra time, right? Right, so this is basically a quick overview of what we are going to do, not in any particular order, but we'll look at very briefly, you know the 4 types of essays, and we'll, based on the marking scheme, we'll look at what it takes to write a grade essay, what an A grade essay looks like. And then we'll look at things like structuring the essay, in a little bit of detail, and then we'll look at a few do's and don'ts. In other words, what to do in terms of language, what to do in terms of style, and what you should not do, right? So before we start, I'd like to quickly ask you, if you don't mind, just write in the chat box what you think are your difficulties when it comes to writing an essay. Okay, I'll just give you 3 minutes. And I hope I can see the chat box while I can hear me. Yeah? Okay, vocabulary is difficult, structure is difficult. Okay, what else? Oh my goodness, time, structuring the answer. Lots are coming in, great, okay. Time is a factor. Not knowing enough facts, good point, right? Language is an issue, okay. Structure again, we lack information, then organization is a problem. To the extent of the content, very good point. Okay, and how to arrange the points and organization. Language fluency, okay, and how to prepare for an answer. and writing the conclusion. I can't manage my answer. No matter how we write, we don't score a lot. Haha. Okay, nice laughing face also. Maybe we can see why that happens. Okay. What is the structure to write 3 points? Okay, so that I think belongs to the previous session. Now we are moved on to paper 2. Okay. Complex words, how to separate paragraphs, facts that should be included, grammar, how many pages to write, expressing my ideas, a lot. Okay, thanks a lot. That's a lot of points. And I will try to keep them all in mind, right? Okay, now you can stop. Right? So very quickly, I think it's still coming on. I'm going to stop answering that question now, and we'll go back to, I'll try to keep all those, the most important ones that I wouldn't cover in mind. Right, so we know that there are 4 types of essays in the paper. Okay, we get what is called the factual essay, and we have a creative composition for creative writers, which is basically a short story, and then there's a film review or a review of a book. The last 3 years that I looked at, it has been a film that you have to review, and then to write a report. And these are the kind of topics that you have been getting, So on the left, in the box in the left, that starts with the digital era has made libraries unnecessary. That's from last year's paper, 2020. The next one is from 2019, and the following one is from 2018. Okay, so you can see basically the first 3 topics are the factual essay topics. Then the 4th one tends to be the short story. The 5th one tends to be the review. And the 6th one is usually the report, right? And it just says write a report. Okay, so there is where the structure becomes really, really important. And there is a very simple structure that you can follow, right? But of course, we know that the factual essay tends to be the most popular among students. Review also tends to be a bit popular. The creative composition, not so popular, only a few students attempt it, like the report, okay? So we will start with the factual essay. We'll look a little bit at the creative composition, and then we will, if we have time, we will look at the review and the report briefly, and we'll also look at the review. Only if we have time, we'll go into detail with the review. Is that all right? Okay, depending on time. Can't we guess this year's factual essay and report? Yes, there's an activity, Satmi. Yes, thanks, Anjali. That seems okay, right? So if there's anything important you want to talk about, we can do that also. So if you look at the breakdown of marks, it tells us 2 important things actually. One is that there are certain skills that are tested across these different types of essays. So they all are marked for content, okay, what you're going to say, right? And then how to organize it, okay, how you present it. Then language. Language is checked in everyone. Language styles might differ. For example, in the creative composition, you have more freedom to experiment with language because it's a creative piece of work, But in the other 3, it has to be formal written language, which you have been practicing, I hope, to write in your classes, right? But at the same time, we have different essays because that is to give students a bit of freedom to choose what you like to do. For example, you might like the factual essay, to write a factual essay more than a review, for instance. Or you might be a really keen film buff, and whenever you watch a film, you watch it critically, you have a lot of things to say about it. You can analyze films, you like talking about films, very in-depth with friends. Then it might, you might choose the review to write because you have seen a lot of films, and you can actually find a film at the exam that resonates with, or that reflects the theme that they're talking about, that they want you to explore in the film, right? So that's where it gives you a little bit of space to do it according to what you like to do, according to your personality, and of course, according to your skills, right? So we will move on. we'll look at the factual essay, right? Now, an A grade answer, now this is what the answer key says, the answer guide says, which as Dr. Shashi mentioned is already up on the Education Ministry website, I understand, okay? So the content shows an in-depth knowledge of the topic, okay? In other words, if you impress your examiners about knowledge that they might not be aware of, or they have only a vague idea of, that will obviously interest you, okay? And also, when you talk about facts, when you talk about information to use in your essay, they have to be relevant to your question. So for example, if you're going to write an essay about, say for instance, the digital era, you have to have a good idea of what the digital era is about, what it means to be in the digital era, okay? That's the way to make your facts relevant. And always remember, match the point you make with at least one example. One very well described example is better than a list of 3 or 4 or 5 examples, okay? And one of you had asked about how to separate your paragraphs. Now, one very simple way to separate your paragraphs is to have one main point followed by a nicely fleshed out example, okay? So your body of your essay, in a factual essay, you will have an introduction, and then in the introduction you say where you stand, your position. We'll look at how we write about your position in the essay. Then the entire body of the essay, if you have 5 points, is 5 paragraphs. You describe the point, you give an example, and you also what we call nuance the point. You say why this is important or why it might not be important, okay? That also you can do, right? So very simply, if you are really struggling with paragraphs, think of it like this: 1 point and an example, 1 paragraph. Next point, an example, 2nd paragraph. 3rd point and an example, 3rd paragraph, and so on, right? So when you give the point, you can flesh it out, you can give an example, you can discuss the appropriateness of the example, and then you will have a nice fleshed out paragraph, okay? The amount of detail you want to go into each paragraph obviously depends on the amount of time you have to write the essay, okay? That way you will address the organization issue as well, okay? We talk a lot about the introduction and the conclusion, and we know how to separate the introduction and the conclusion. But that is how you would do the body of your essay, right? A very simple way to do the body of, to do the bulk of your essay. No? And then when you think about points, try to develop them logically, okay? For example, something about, if you're writing a essay on the global pandemic. Now, last year's question was, a global pandemic can transform human values. And you agree with this, and you give examples, your answer is made up of how the global pandemic can transform. Transform means change for the better, okay? Change not just for, a little, make it a little bit better, but transformational. To transform means to change it so that it improves society. It makes society a better place. It makes our lives easier, our lives better. It improves humankind, for example, right? Then you must when we talk about ideas developing logically, what it means is you start with the most important idea, the main idea that you have, okay? And then the next one is a little less important, and 3rd one, 4th one, and only at the end you talk about the least important point. Sometimes students get a bit confused and start with the not so important point, and then they run out of time to talk about the most important point, okay? So this is why it's very important when you write an essay to quickly do a little outline for yourself. So now when you're studying, if you're facing the exam this year in October, just practice writing an outline and then developing it under timed conditions. So when you're writing an essay, keep at least 3 or 4 minutes to quickly jot down an outline. You might change the outline while you write. It's okay, that can happen. But actually have all the points you want to make, the most important ones, down on a piece of scrap paper, right? Then the other one uses appropriate cohesive devices to make the essay logical and readable. Okay, cohesive devices are words, phrases, even whole sentences that you use to make it easier for the reader to see what you're doing in the essay. For example, in the first paragraph, in this paragraph, I will talk about this point. Next, after that, finally, words like that. Okay. If you're making a change, like a transition from talking about good things to bad things, you say, up to now, I have discussed the advantages of this, whatever it is. Next, I will discuss the disadvantages. Okay. So that's a cohesive device that is of 2 sentences long. Okay. So when you use things like that, you don't have to put them all over. But when you use a few like that, about 3 or 4 like that in your essay, it gives the impression that you have thought about its readability, how reader-friendly it is. Remember, your essay being reader-friendly is actually a very good, will gain you marks in organization, right? Then, of course, we know about grammar and spelling, how your grammar and spelling has to be correct. And style and diction here refers to the appropriate use of words, okay? Style is whether it is formal or informal, right? And then with style, we know that we have to write in a certain formal way. We don't write in a way we write an SMS and all that. But if we go back to grammar, right? Grammar is very interestingly, we can have accurate grammar, but not get the best marks for grammar because we can maintain accuracy. We can write very accurate sentences by writing very babyish sentences, no? Very, very short, simple sentences, which are not really suitable for an essay at A-level level. No? So that's why it talks about using complex sentences. Now, complex sentences doesn't mean that you write very interminably long sentences, right? Because sometimes we can, when we are thinking and writing, sometimes our sentences can be very, very, very long. It can go up to a paragraph. No? Complexity in a sentence is when it has more than one clause, okay? So you use sentences with although, you use sentences with because, you use sentences with however, okay? They're a bit longer than the very, very short sentences, right? And of course, grammar, we have to be careful of subject and verb agreement, then prepositions, then articles, we tend to forget the articles, okay? Sometimes we miss articles, sometimes we put articles where they are not necessary. And also remember, spelling and grammar also include punctuation, right? I must say, as far as I am, my experience with A-level marking goes, punctuation does not seem to be a problem with our students. Our children tend to be okay with their full stops and commas, except there's sometimes they use certain commas in the wrong place, right? So there are lots of resources online on how to use punctuation correctly, what each punctuation is. Just take a look at those and improve on your own, because now we are working on our own at home, we are online, and use the online facilities to find out about punctuation, how to correct it. I still look up punctuation rules because I still make mistakes, okay? Prepositions also is a big area where we make mistakes, but I must say, unless there is a huge breakdown in the communication, a couple of grammar mistakes are not considered terrible, okay? Because you're writing under speed, you're writing under a lot of stress. Occasionally, it is quite natural to make grammar errors when you write at great speed, okay? The way to overcome it is with practice, okay? So write one essay and then try to rewrite it under timed conditions. If at the exam you get 40 minutes, at home try to do it in 30 minutes, right? And if you look at vocabulary doesn't mean using big words, right? Sometimes the mistake that students make is very idiomatic expressions, like it is clear that. You think it's better to say it is visible that. It's wrong because clear and visible, they are not an exact synonym, right? Visible is something you can see with your eyes, something that's physically visual. Clear means it's clear in your head, okay? You understand it. Okay, so it's wrong to say it is visible that when you want to say it is clear that, right? And a good range of vocabulary means you have quite a extensive vocabulary. You know how to make vocabulary choices, right? And style, once again, I said is a fairly formal style, but remember it's not the pompous style. It's not overly on it, but accurate and not informal, right? And that last one, a flair for writing, is an extra mark that you get because there are some students who are very talented in writing. No, it's like an inborn skill they have, and if you're able to show that, you will get a couple of marks extra for this. Right? Now I will take a short pause and see what your questions are. Okay, lots of questions. Right, okay, I'll start with Kesharas or Kesharat. Does it mean a matter in using of modern language in creative writing? Yeah, I can see a lot of questions about creative writing. Yes, you can use as long as it is appropriate. Okay, as long as it is suitable, you can use colloquial language. You can use informal language. You can use Victorian language if you can recreate it correctly. Okay. You can use, you can write the whole story in SMS if you like, right? But that might be too much of a risk. That might be too experimental. Remember, this is an exam and all your examiners are not creative writers. So they might not really, really know, be able to mark you in terms of language if you experiment too much with language. But modern language is fine, okay, and colloquial language, especially if you're recreating a dialogue. Say if the story is about a mother and a child, mother and her daughter talking, you can't use formal language, no, because you don't talk to your mother in formal language. You talk to her in very intimate, simple, informal language. No? Right. We will be Shania. We will be doing a film review. Okay. Thank you. Okay, now we'll go back to the slides. I think, no, there are some more questions. Jansi Devaraja and Hiruni, is it okay to use simple language? I think I explained that about simple language. No? You can use simple language, direct. You can say things directly. Remember, in English, we tend to write directly rather than in Sinhala, where we need to show our, when we read in Sinhala, you will see, or in Tamil, you will see that if you read like an article in a newspaper, there is a lot of effort made to write a very ornate, in a very ornate style. You're showing that you know a lot of words. You don't have to do that in English. The way you're writing here is actually the kind of style that you need to develop, make more fluent for the essay as well. Okay. So you don't have to use complicating words for the sake of using big words. Okay. The normal phrase, the normal word will do, but by normal, I mean the formal normal, not the colloquial, everyday spoken normal, right? The only way to not stray from your point is to stick to your structure, okay? So Devmini, write down a small outline, okay? Just say, okay, these are the main points I will discuss, and this is what I can say in the introduction, this is what I can say in the conclusion in brief points, okay? In short form, you write it and stick to it. Keep looking at it and coming back to it. And if you find that when you write, you stray from your point, other ideas come and you write it, just do it as practice, okay? Let your writing flow like that. Remember, learning to write is a very much a process, right? So if you find, Devmini, when you're writing, you stray from the point a lot, let yourself stray first and then write a new essay on the same point, deleting where you have strayed, okay? So write it, read it, rewrite it, okay? I think how to develop essay writing I have been talking about. Marks won't be deducted if you write in simple language, but don't make it too simplistic, right? Direct speech and indirect speech, my goodness, lots of questions are coming. Recommended in conveying, that is completely up to you, Sevni, because in a creative piece, it can be direct speech. Amma said, Appa said, I said, he said, okay? Or you can even say, Amma said that. Okay, that is up to that is your creative choice, right? I'm a single medium student doing literature, not contain heavy words, yes. I think when you talk about heavy words, I think because we write, our style in Sinhala is very heavy, we think we need to use words that are very unusual. You don't, okay? You don't have to do that, right? So Nelly Ekanayaka, should we have facts as a statistic? Yes. If you use facts, it will help you. I mean, because that is using examples. So that is what I mean by using examples. But at the same time, this is not a social studies paper. No, this is not an economics paper. You don't have to have a lot of accurate facts, right? Just opinions of other people, expert opinions, those are enough. You don't have to study, say, for instance, detailed statistics about things, but just normal things. So if we will think of certain papers that might come, and then we will see the extent of how much we can use facts and how much we need to remember, right? I think, Rachel, we talked about how we display our knowledge in writing an essay by making it structured, by giving your points and examples. Okay. I think, thank you. I'm glad you like the way I'm teaching you. Thanks a lot. Is it compulsory to use? Yes, my dear. You have to use relevant examples in the essay, but don't make the examples complicated, right? You can have very easy examples, but write them nicely. How should we make a conclusion meaningful to the reader? We'll look at that, okay? When we're writing, can we use examples in our essay? Like when we write an essay about dengue fever, can we mention that? Yes, of course you can. There's an increase in dengue fever from this year to next. You can say a 50% increase or increase in numbers of this much of that. But if you don't know the numbers, you can say there has been a significant increase. There's been a worrying increase. Okay. This is the use of passive voice, a plus point. Very good question, because passive voice and mixing passive voice and active voice is how we write academically, is how we write, is how we create formal writing essays, essays written in formal writing. But don't passivize every sentence, okay? Usually use active voice when you're making giving a very strong point. When you're giving your most important point, you can use the active voice. But at the same time, if you don't want to say who said what, etc., then passive voice also can be used. Right? Yes, I think you should have your examples as contemporary as possible, right? Up-to-date examples, timely examples. But it doesn't matter if you take examples from history, examples from other countries also. as long as you don't make it too historical. Okay. I'm not going to answer questions on literature because this is on the essay. Oh, very interesting. Can we use our native language for conversations? I think you're referring to obviously the creative composition. Yes, you can, but always put the translation within brackets, right? You can't really use conversational language in an essay, but at the same time, let me reassure you that in English, there is not much of a big difference between conversational formal language and informal language, right? How many sentences do we have to write in one paragraph? Now, that is a very vague. If I tell you 5.2, will it make any sense? No. So you can't count. It depends on what topic you're writing about, which paragraph it is. Is it your main point? Is it your introduction? Is it your conclusion? Okay, so don't go by these quantities, how many sentences in one paragraph. Just go by what you're saying and what meaning you're conveying and how well you're conveying it. Okay, we will look at some examples, Mahima. From BBC, you can. And something, very good point. Can we write false facts? Can we use examples from BBC? Yes, you can. And I think, Hansi, a lot of very clever students give false statistics, okay? Now, there is a very good side to it and a very bad side to it. The good thing is it looks very, very impressive because you have given figures, okay? So, one examiner might read it and say, my goodness, this child knows the statistics also, knows all the facts and figures, right? What is the bad side of it? Bad side is if the examiner finds out that you're telling lies, then of course you will lose a lot of marks. So it's a bit of a risk, right? Giving false facts. Just give the general information. If you don't want to give the figures, if you don't have numbers, just give the information. Like saying there was an increase without saying an increase of 50%, significant increase. Okay. How many pages for the essay once again? I think similar to what Dr. Shashi said, we don't go by page numbers. I don't think any examiner counts the pages. At the same time, you can't write an essay for a topic like this in one page. No? At the same, in order to write the introduction, the conclusion, and develop your answer in the middle of it, it usually goes on to about 2.5 pages, 3 pages, 3.5 pages. There's no set page limit because from my experience, I know your handwriting varies a lot. Some students have really tiny handwriting, really compact way of writing with little space. Some students, when you write very quickly, your handwriting becomes big, like big balls, and then you take up more pages. So it's very hard to talk in terms of pages, right? The highest mark given for the essay is how much? 30 marks. So it's a big part of your paper, no? Nearly, yes, it is okay to include quotations that people have said about a particular thing, especially experts. Okay, that's very good. You can always quote experts, like if you're talking about reforestation, you can quote a forestry expert, an environmentalist who has said something important. And that's what even newspapers go by. If somebody says, somebody important, a knowledgeable, educated person in that area who has specialized in that area says, okay, this is terrible. What's happening is terrible because this is, and they can even make prophecies. They can even predict what will happen in the future. That is considered important news even, right? So you can always quote what people have said, but not your uncle down the road, okay? He has to be he or she has to be an expert. So if she's a scientist who's talking about global warming and climate change, then you can quote her, okay? Should we present an unbiased theory for an essay? Very interesting, we'll look at that, okay? How about the tense? Oh, very interesting. Usually essays are written in the past tense, okay, simple past tense. right? And yes, you can include your personal ideas in a factual essay, but you present it objectively, okay? You don't present it as, this is my most favorite, I strongly feel that. You present it as an idea, okay? So basically, though we call them objective essays, there's a lot of personal feelings that go into an essay, no? Because if you feel strongly about climate change, deforestation, then the most important point you pick is not just an objective choice, no? It is also a personal belief. This is an important point. But you write it in the third person, you write it in an objective style, okay? 1 page, 2 sides for a essay. Depends on how small your handwriting is, my dear Liana, okay? Can we mix up the sentences? Depends, okay? Sometimes it's okay, especially if you're doing the creative writing. You can. Of course, we can mix up the sentences depending on what we're saying. So if you're talking about the effects of long-term effects of deforestation, obviously you're going to use the future tense, no? It will create further damage to the environment. If you talk about deforestation in the past, what happened in the last 30 years, it has. Then it's obviously the past tense, right? Including the source, very good question. Now, usually including the source means writing lists of references and all, which is not required for A levels. But you can include the source very simply, like according to a BBC report, a BBC News report, according to a World Bank report, according to the daily newspapers, according to the Divayana newspaper of the date. That is giving the source, right? Yes, you can. Okay, so I talked about personal opinions. The entire essay is actually a personal stance. Right, now I'm going to ask you, oh my God, there's more questions. Paragraphs, reviews, false facts. Can we go against the topic? Yes, very good, you can actually. There's no word limits, Sihana, don't worry. If you do what I am telling you here, somehow you can get full marks. Yes, you can make arguments. We'll look at the factual essay. Some of them, actually many of them ask you to take a side. If your letters are tiny, it's okay if you just write 2 pages. My dear, your letters might get big when you're writing. But actually, if your letters are very, very tiny, I suppose if you, don't make it too tiny, okay? 2 pages should be okay if your letters are really tiny, right? Right, okay. Now I'll go back to I'm going to shut the chat box for a bit and we'll go back to the essays, back to my slides. Right, now this is where I said you can bring in your point of view in any factual essay. So that's why I call the factual essay, though we call it a factual essay, it's a slight misnomer. Misnomer is a word that we use to say the name is not really right for this, right? It's so because the essay combines facts, certain ideas, as well as your views, okay? Facts, like if you take deforestation, for instance, it will give you the facts about exactly how much of Sri Lanka's forest cover has been destroyed, or we know that Sri Lanka has now out of the country only 22% of forest cover. Okay, remember that. You probably won't get the same same essay, but that is a fact. Apparently, only about 22%. Now, that is a fact affirmed by the Wildlife Department and the Forestry Department, etc. Then ideas will be what an expert says. And also an expert forester will say, or an expert environmentalist will come and say, this is going to decline. Based on my research, this is going to decline. By the end of the 21st century, we will have less than 15% forest cover in the country. Okay, so that's an informed idea, right? Then your view is how you look at this. You might see this as a terrible thing. a tragic thing, a disaster that's waiting to happen. Okay. On the other hand, you might see it as a normal thing with progress, with the growth of population. It's not so terrible. It's an inevitable thing. So that's where your point of view comes in. Okay, and that's what we call a position or a stance that you take. Okay, so for example, your stance will be, if you take that essay topic on top, young people's role in building a peaceful society, your stance can be several. Okay, that's the standpoint you take. That's the point of view you adopt, right? So you can say, take several stances. You can firmly believe that the young people have a role to play, and then you can discuss what they do in your essay one by one by one. They can do this, and this is how you can do this. They can do that, and this is how you must do that, etc. Because you firmly believe only the young people can build a peaceful society in this country, right? Then you can also be a little less certain about it, a little bit more tentative about this, and say, yes, young people have a role to play, but it will depend on the older people, the present government, their education, and other things to create a peaceful society, right? Then you can also disagree with this and say, it's not the young people's role to build a peaceful society. It is the ruling party's role to build a peaceful society. It is a politician's role to build a peaceful society. It is our teachers, the leaders of society, teachers and the professionals and the clergy to build it. They are responsible to build a society, not young people. Okay, so that's where you can take different stances, right? In factual essays, it's always better not to take an extreme stance, to say yes, definitely, or no, definitely not. The better essay, if you read the marking scheme carefully, the better essay will take a position, okay, adopt one point of view, but also show that you're aware of the other side of the argument. Okay, so the best essays show that. Right? Now we will see how we can structure a factual essay. Okay, in a lot of essays, there is this underlying question that is asked. Do you agree? Or it's not even asked, it is actually implied, right? The digital era has made made libraries unnecessary. That is from last year's paper. The cultural center of every town should be the theater. Do you agree? Now that directly asks, do you agree or not? Okay. And then we looked at this third question, the third essay topic, the global pandemic can transform human lives. All these you can disagree also. All these you can agree. Okay. So if you say, for example, libraries are useless in this age because we've gone digital, we have soft copies, we have smartphones, we have tabs, and we don't need books in a formal library, and libraries are virtual. You have plenty of points to argue that stance. Okay, you have plenty of points to write a very good essay, right? And also when you write an essay, you don't have to have 25 points. Okay, remember, 5 to 6 points are more than enough. Even 3 points if you flesh them out nicely. If you describe them nicely, 3 or 4 points are more than enough, right? That's how you minimize on time. So when you do your draft, when you do your outline, you might get a lot of ideas. Okay, I can say this, I can say that, this, and this. Look at it again and say, okay, I don't have the time to do 5, 6, 7, and 8. I will concentrate on 1, 2, 3, and 4 and write them nicely because I have a lot of ideas for them. I have a lot of facts, I have a lot of opinions, informed opinions from experts that I can write for them, right? So all these questions have this implied thing. The level of agreement and disagreement depends on what you want to say, right? So if we look at a small visual, right? You have heard about these essays that talk about, do you agree, yes or no? What are the pros and cons of something? What are the arguments for and against something? What are the advantages and disadvantages of something? Okay. So the easiest structure is called the A and B structure. Okay, so you have an introduction, then you write the advantages, and then you have a transition paragraph. I talked about transitions earlier, and then you talk about the disadvantages, and then you come to the conclusion, right? Now, no essay will be so neat unless it's a fairly simple topic. No? So, for example, when we were younger, we wrote essays like, the pros and cons of public transport. But if we take like digital era has made libraries unnecessary, I suppose you could fit it into this structure. Maybe we can, you can try your hand at this. And then you write 3 paragraphs with 3 points saying, yes, libraries are necessary. Then you have a transition. Then you say, no, on the other hand, even though we live in a digital age, we do need libraries. And then you say, give the point 1, point 2, point 3, disagreeing with the main statement in the essay, right? Now look at this structure on the right-hand side. That's called the AB structure, okay? This is a little bit more complex, right? But you might like to try your hand at this. This is when you decide on one topic, on one subtopic, and in there you talk about the advantages and the disadvantages both, right? Then you come to the next subtopic and you talk about the advantages and disadvantages of that subtopic. You come to the third one and then you talk about the advantages and disadvantages of that topic. That is much more complex, and you need to have comparable points, points that have both advantages and disadvantages, like air travel, okay? So for example, if you talk about air pollution, we say air travel is an advantage as well as a disadvantage. No, air travel makes the globe a small a village. It exposes us to cultures. We can travel thousands of kilometers in a few hours, but at the same time, air travel is also very bad for our environment. Okay, so this is the simplest structure. This is the hardest structure. But some of you who are very familiar with this structure and you have done this a lot, maybe you want to try your hand at this. Okay, and remember, sometimes when we write factual essays, we don't have a comparable number of advantages and disadvantages, so arguments for or against, right? You might have one argument for, the rest of it might be against, okay? You might have one argument against and the rest of it might be for, right? So depending on what is most important in your point of view, you start with that. You can start with saying, no, this is not important. No, I don't agree. But on the other hand, I agree with all this, right? It's better to start with the positive. I think that is human nature. Even an examiner who's reading, essay after essay, paper after paper after paper, will like to see something framed positively first, and then you say, but the thing is this, okay? On the other hand, attention needs to be paid to the fact that whatever it is, okay? Right, let me see if you have any questions on this. Better if you use factual essay as an easy way to gain marks. Rachel, good question. I think we are mostly trained to write factual essays. I think, as Rasika has said, you don't have good teacher. That is unfortunately the problem with a lot of schools. We don't have a lot of literature teachers in our country. It's a sad situation. So, but the factual essay is the most most commonly taught essay. Remember, we learn factual essays from childhood now. So I think that is, because it's familiar to us, that is what students prefer, right? Of course, you can, depending on how you perform, you can get very high marks for other essays also, right? Chaturya, I think it's better to avoid rhetorical questions. I know it's a very useful device when we do debating, when we are writing, like a formal speech, a ceremonial speech. But in academic writing, a formal writing, rhetorical questions are not really considered suitable. Okay. Yes, of course, Nimasha, that's what we were talking about writing the positives and the negative sides both, right? Of course, you can go against the political situation in an essay, right? You don't have to write according to the ruling party or according to any political party, any ruling anybody, right? You can be frank, right? Thematic concern, let's do Shashi. Yes, I think if you look at an introduction, in English essays, the introduction usually addresses the topic directly. Okay, it's not compulsory to write the factual essay. You can write the creative essay. It's not risky to comment on the political conditions. Okay, you can criticize anybody, right? Transitions. Okay, we'll try. Minoli, I have answered your question. Stop posting it again. Michelle, it's not just advantages or disadvantages. It can be points for or points against, right? You can also always quote and use other extracts. Yes, you can agree or disagree in the conclusions. Actually, it's better Vihara, I'm not sure whether they're a girl or a boy, but you can, that's what I talked about, taking a position, taking a stance. So in the first, in your introduction itself, you can say whether you disagree, you agree, or you have, you will discuss both sides of the topic, of the issue, right? So you start by saying it, and then you conclude also by what we call reinforcing, you have to say. You can use familiar celebrities quotes, but only if they're relevant, okay? So don't tell me, don't write about, I don't know, who's Lady Gaga's views on environment unless she's an ambassador for United Nations Environmental Fund or whatever, right? You're welcome. Let's go back to the slides. Right, now you asked me about possible topics for this year. Now, I was thinking this afternoon, there is a pandemic-related topic in last year's paper, but that was early months of the pandemic. No? And I think it's a fairly positive question about how the global pandemic can transform human values. Okay, how our values will get better. You know, we will appreciate human beings. We will adopt human values like kindness and, you know, love, and I don't know what other values we hold, right? So that asks you more about the good side of the pandemic, no? Because we are all collectively suffering. Our good, our positive values will get enhanced. Now we'll look at the situation 1.5 years later. We are suffering. No, many people have died in our country. Many people have been infected. I know people very close to me who have died of COVID, who have been quarantined. People down my road already. There are my neighbors who are right now quarantined. So it's not very nice. No, I'm sure you have as well, right? But we will look at. There will be more pandemic-related topics coming up now. Okay. So one obvious one for you is the online education question. No? So the strengths and the challenges, or the positives and the negatives, the pros and cons of the opportunities and the challenges of online education, right? And then you can also, we can also think of the benefits and the ill effects of the lockdown. You know, how we have faced lockdown, the long-term effects of lockdown. It can be psychological, it can be economic, it can be social. there can be positive effects also psychologically, socially, and economically. Okay, then you can do a nice AB essay based on that, right? Then also how the pandemic is defining our experience of the pandemic is also based on whether we are rich or poor. No? If you are rich, you can go to a quarantine hotel. If you are poor, you used to be taken to a center, a quarantine center. Now, if you are whether you are in a big house or a small house or a very family of 10 living in one room, you are quarantined in your house. Okay, so if you have a house with a garden, it is quite pleasant. But if you are with your mother, grandmother, father, and 3 sisters in one small room, it is very, very difficult. Okay, so poverty and affluence have had an impact on how we experience the coronavirus. Okay, and then of course politics are part of the pandemic. No, the global politics, local politics. There you can be frank, right? Then mass media and the pandemic. How the pandemic has been reported. Earlier we saw the reporting was very racist. No, if a Muslim person was tested positive, they will say a Muslim man was tested positive. His religion is not relevant. It's a pandemic, and we know that every race in the country or in the world, everyone of any religion, any race, any class, any status have been victims of the pandemic. Okay, so those are the pandemic-related topics that I think might come. Then another one is our now marine pollution disaster, the sinking of the Express Pearl tanker, right? So marine pollution and its impact on us, on not just the environment, but it can be the economic environment. Remember, there are a lot of fishermen who can't work because of the pollution in the sea after the Express Pearl sank, in that area. Then, of course, we know exactly how many turtles died, how many, if you look at the Sunday papers, there is a report on 124 turtles having died, then some number of dolphins and other fish who have died, and sea mammals who have died as a result of the pollution in the sea, right? Then you can also talk about, so that's the environmental, economic, and also it can impact on tourism, part of environment. And also, it also tells us about how there are too many tankers in the country, in the seas, in high seas, and how actually there's too much usage of the sea for human transportation and all that, right? So you can go to town on that topic, right? And then press freedom. Attached to all these topics is press freedom versus ethical and responsible reporting. Okay, that might be a topic. I don't know whether that is a suitable topic for A-level students, but I don't think it's too difficult. There are some essays online about press freedom and ethical reporting, ethical journalism, responsible reporting. For example, some of our private TV stations have been warned about unethical reporting. You only have to read the newspapers about how they're reporting the case of the 15-year-old girl who was sexually abused by apparently hundreds of men. How if they reveal the girl's name and photograph, that is very unethical, right? And any others that you might be able to predict. Okay, let's see. Can you think of any? You might get an essay on on agriculture. My goodness, very good point. Who is this? UTR. Yes, the farmers strike. No, we might get a. You might. I don't know whether the fertilizer. Another possibility is our rather rapid switch to chemical fertilizer from widespread use of chemical fertilizer. Sorry, switch to organic fertilizer from chemical fertilizer. That might be another essay topic. So let us put that also. Very good. So that's what you organic fertilizer. I don't think the question, if at all, will ask about the pros and cons of organic fertilizer or to ask you to compare organic and chemical fertilizer, but it will probably ask you to talk about or analyze or discuss how to make your agriculture organic, make, what steps should be followed, what should not be done, what should be done, the pros and cons of introducing a ban on chemical fertilizer. Okay, the rapid introduction of organic fertilizer and the ban on chemical fertilizer. Right? Let me see. Now lots of questions are coming. Child protection, port city, very good. Port city might be a problem, might be a possible question. Medical services, palm oil. Wow, you guys are very well informed about the vaccination campaign. Yeah, actually earlier I wrote vaccinations also with the pandemic, the vaccination. Palm oil consumption, the right to protest, very good, Viara. Child protection. Mentalities is rather than mentality is a slightly wrong word to use there, though we use it. Mentality is fine to talk about it informally, but when we talk about it formally, we should say mental health of people during the pandemic. Okay, very good suggestions. Okay, all those are possibilities. Right, I think we are going to run out of time, so I will move on now from factualities. I think we will quickly look at a few do's and don'ts, which will be relevant to reports also. Okay, so this is where we talk about introductions, as one of you asked. You need to avoid those poetic, flowery, imaginative introduction. I heard Dr. Shashi also saying, don't use flowery statements. That is when we use a lot of ornate words, without really getting to the point. It is not a feature of English writing. It is often a feature of Sinhala essay writing and Tamil essay writing, but not a feature of English essay writing. So we need to make that cultural switch. It's difficult because even a lot of teachers think we need to do this in English, but you don't, okay? So directly address the topic in your introduction, mention the keywords in the very first sentence. So if the essay is on digital era and libraries, mention digital era and libraries in your first sentence itself, right? And also in your introduction, include a sentence that clearly gives your position. That's your standpoint, what you believe in the essay. So something like, to a great extent, I agree that the global pandemic can transform human values. My position regarding the statement is this. I find it difficult to agree that the global pandemic can transform human values because there is too much evidence to the contrary. My essay will discuss this. Okay, so then the reader will know you are not really agreeing with this. You agree a little bit, but generally you are going to disagree with it. That's how you give your position in the essay. This would be your thesis statement as well. Okay, because the rest of the essay is based on this. So what the rest of the essay does is illustrate your position. It illustrates or expands on your thesis statement, right? So in your essay, have about 4 or 5 main points, but flesh them out. While what I mean by fleshing them out is discuss them in depth. Okay, discuss them, giving examples, giving precise facts and figures as far as possible, giving quotes from other people, and really write it in a way that it convinces you and convinces the reader, right? Don't, as I said earlier, list the points that you have without any discussion, okay? With very, very short points. If at all, if you have like some other points you want to put in somewhere, refer to them briefly in your conclusion. In addition to what I have discussed, you can say, in addition to what I have discussed, there is also X, Y, and Z to consider, right? Spend a little time on your conclusion. This is what you can do in your conclusion, according to, as someone asked. You can briefly summarize your essay in 2 lines, okay? You don't have to write a précis of your essay. Then say something about what is significant about your topic. Why is your topic important? So in a way, you take your topic and relate it to the larger world, larger context. How about the transformation of human values during the global pandemic. You relate it to human nature or our lives in general, or lives in a post-pandemic time or whatever, right? That is up to you, but that will be nice. Right, now we look at the creative composition. Okay, this is the short story. Let me quickly pause and see. Oh yeah, you have a lot of possible, post-COVID Sri Lanka exploitation, human-elephant conflict, etc. Seuni, very good question. When we include political criticisms, is it all right to specify political parties and politicians, or be low-key to be on the safe side? Very good point. What you should do is not refer to people by name, okay? So you can say the minister of whatever the other, an MP, a provincial councillor in the Western province. If you're from the Central province, say a provincial councillor in the Central province. Don't call him, by the name. It's better. It's more professional. Then otherwise it's a bit personal. While we have a right to criticize anybody in your essay, it's also better not to make it like a petty personal attack. Though some of the politicians nowadays are worthy of attacking, let's not stoop to that level. Okay. Right, again about transitions, Shashikala. Right, transition basically means when you use a word or a phrase or a sentence to show when you're changing the contents of your essay, right? So transition means something like, okay, so a little paragraph that goes like this. Up to now, this essay has discussed advantages of something. From this point, it will discuss disadvantages. That's a transition. Another transition is next. Okay. Finally, in conclusion. All those are transitions. They're also called signposts, right? Yes, devices. You were probably Heshini. You probably might not get a essay on addiction to devices because of online learning. That's very specific. But this will be definitely a point to use in online education during COVID. Okay, the mass grief of youth and the pandemic. That sounds wonderful. I hope that goes into a creative essay, right? Lack of discipline in sport. Is that writing a factual essay more advantageous than a creative composition? It's very subjective. It depends, no? Because a well-written factual essay is better than a badly written creative essay, and vice versa, the other way around, right? Let us see. I think I will look at this. We will go through this rather quickly. Right, things to remember for the short story, right? Now, more and more, it is an idea. No? The last couple of years, traditionally those days, like 5-6 years ago, there was a line that you had to use in the essay. So your essay had to be built up. You had to think about the essay in a way that this line is best integrated. So suddenly I opened the door and there was no one there. That line has to go into your essay somewhere, said by someone, felt by someone. But now it is an idea. No? So for example, last year's short story topic is to incorporate the idea, I am most alone when I'm among the company of my friends. Okay, that's a beautiful line where you can feel alone when you're surrounded by friends. Okay, so it's just the idea that has to be conveyed, not the line, right? Here, don't worry about length. I think there is a lot of flexibility in how long your short story can be or how short your short story can be, particularly, because it's creative writing. We know short stories can be 40 pages or 3 pages, no, if you read short stories. But of course, what happens is if it's very short, you won't give much of a chance to the the examiner to see how well you can write, and you won't have time to develop the story or to display your abilities in the 4 criteria. So the 4 criteria are actually even things like characterization and plot. Okay, so to have a plot, you need a bit of length. No, plotless short stories are very short. Okay, like Hemingway short stories, they are generally takes place within like 2 hours or 3 hours, and they don't have a long plot. But this expects a short plot. It doesn't have to go for 10 years, right? It can take place during one day, but it expects a kind of a sequence of events, right? Here you can also mix your styles very effectively. So as some of you asked earlier, can we use colloquial language? Obviously, if it's a conversation, you don't have to use formal language, and you don't even have to write the essay in a very formal style. You can write it in Sri Lankan English. You can write it the way a child writes. The point of view of a child is something you can explore. If you like to write very simply, try to write the short story from the point of view of a child, okay? But make sure that that information comes out in the story, right? There are pros and cons of attempting this topic. You know, there are advantages and disadvantages. One of the disadvantages is you can't predict the topic. Right now, I can't even guess what kind of, I might be able to guess the factual essays because they are based on contemporary events, no? But I can't even guess what the essay topic might be because they're very subjective. It depends on the creativity of the examiners, right? But at the same time, sometimes when we are very stressed and under a lot of pressure, we can get very good ideas. Our creativity can suddenly take off, okay? So you might be inspired based on what the prompt is, okay? Another thing you must remember is that your own personal experiences, what you have observed happening around you, to your friends, a story your parents or your relatives have told you that happened long ago, which is factual, but actually you can turn it into a short story. That's how a lot of good writers write anyway, right? So I don't see why you can't do it. But of course, you must change the names and the names of the people and the places so that it is fictionalized, okay? So remember, you can turn into fiction something factual that has gone on, right? And writing narratively is something that is easy to say what happens next is the easiest kind of writing to write, no? But at the same time, what you have to be careful of is not to exaggerate and to give too much detail. Sometimes when we write a short story, there is a lot you can say with very little. You don't have to fill in all the gaps, right? You don't have to describe everything. You don't have to give full descriptions of people or places. Just a few details will convey, right? Also, don't exaggerate in the sense of language exaggeration using hyperbole. His heart was like the night sky, the moon in the sky, and his eyes were like stars, just to say that he was good looking, you know. Don't use hyperbole. Another thing that's hard to do is to create suspense, you know, that kind of device that is very effective in literary writing is suspense. It's hard to create it, but some of you may have practiced and maybe good. You may be quite skilled at it. Okay, now let's look at the review. Here also, one thing we have to, the last couple of years, it has been a film. Something I'd like to draw your attention to that is different from the factual essay is that it has to be your own ideas about the film, original observations, and it has to be an analysis with a critical view of it, okay? So when you say critical, you have to critically review it. That doesn't mean you're only pointing out the flaws. Critical view means you can see the good and the bad, okay? You can see the strengths as well as the weaknesses. So you don't greatly admire too overly, okay? You can admire certain things, but at the same time, point out the flaws, point out what could have improved, right? So when you write the film review, you can refer to any of this. You don't have to refer to all of this. For example, you don't have to refer to all about the theme, the plot, the acting, the setting, the visuals, and the cinematography. That's how it's filmed. What are the close-ups? What are the, the panoramic shots there are? You can even comment on the costumes, but don't try to comment on everything, okay? Look at the theme, see how the theme is brought out. You can see the theme being brought out even in a costume, okay? So what you have to remember is analyze it according to the theme that you have been given. And remember, 2 marks are given if you have identified the right film for the right theme, right? If you haven't, you don't get any of these marks. You'll only be marked out of 10 for language, right? So if you're, if the theme is on, I don't know, on mental health, and you choose a film without any characters with mental health, and you write other things, you won't get content or evaluation marks. You'll only get a few marks for language, and that means basically you failed that question, right? So we'll look at finally for reports. I'm sorry, I have gone on over by 10 minutes, but I think in 10 minutes we can stop. Okay. So usually the report is a very brief topic you get. So what we have got so far is 2020, write a report on deforestation. Previous year, write a report on urban development, write a report on coast conservation in Sri Lanka. So out of this marking scheme is based on deforestation, which is a problem. No? Urban development has a positive and a negative, okay, because people are getting more affluent, people are becoming more urbanized, there's urban development, but of course it impacts on the environment and the natural surroundings. Coast conservation is something we have to do. It's a good thing. No? So depending on the report, on the topic of the report, you have to do certain things. Okay, so first thing you look at is whether you have described the issue or the problem properly. So if you are doing the report, you need to have a bit of in-depth knowledge about deforestation, the facts, the figures, and expert opinions, right? Another thing you have to do in the report is have it divided into sections with very report-like subheadings, right? We'll look at that in the next slide, right? Then you have to also show what has been done to prevent deforestation earlier. So these are informed views. So you're not going like this, very young children who want to save the whales. They don't know anything about the whales, but some big doctor has told them that whales are endangered. They don't know that there have been other things, other steps that have been taken to stop the endangerment of whales, okay? So we can't go like that in that naive way. You have to show that you're also aware of what has been done to prevent deforestation and then propose your own solutions, right? So in that sense, this can be a bit tricky, bit difficult, okay? So when you make give solutions, so you also talk about the problem, you show what has been done, steps already taken, and then you show what has already been, you give your recommendations based on what has not been done. Now, even grown-ups working in offices who are supposed to write, business reports, don't know how to write recommendations properly. Okay, so it's quite obvious, it's quite understandable if we also struggle to write recommendations or solutions. They are not just a list of bullet points. Okay, they have to relate. Each bullet point has to relate to a problem you have identified earlier, and you also have to explain it a little bit. Okay. So it's a list, that's why it says it's a list of carefully considered recommendations. They are practical, they are intelligent, and they are not extreme. So for example, don't make recommendations like, in order to prevent deforestation, we have to kill all the illegal loggers in the country, okay? That kind of recommendation is too extreme. No, we have to stop drug addiction in the country by sentencing all the drug addicts to death, right? Some countries have done it, but it hasn't really worked, right? Like Philippines, right? You give solutions, but also discuss it a little bit. It's not just a list. And of course, the marks for the language is the same as the factual essay. You have to write in accurate language, which is formal, right? So this would be a very simple structure of a report. So you give the background to the report. Okay, so you give the background to a brief background to the topic, whether it's deforestation. You say, okay, the situation, deforestation is a very topical, very hot topic. You don't say hot, sorry, a very something like it's a significant topic currently in our media. Then also, so introduce the topic a little bit. And then you also give the structure of the report. In this report, I will first discuss the background to the problem, the background to the issue. Then I will discuss measures that have been taken. Then I will propose my own recommendations and conclusions. That you can actually put in passive voice rather than saying, I propose these recommendations. The following recommendations are proposed. The following recommendations are presented, right? So that's a very simple structure you can follow to write a report. So practice doing that. Okay, so in conclusion, now we will stop. I will take some of the questions. Okay, very good question, Nipuni. When we write a creative composition, is it all right to include some points from a story or novel I have read? That's a very difficult question to answer because it can be seen as plagiarism. It can be seen as copying, right? Of course, adaptations are fine. If you take, now we know that there are a lot of adaptations of Pride and Prejudice, no? There's the Indian version, you can have a modern version, there are several modern versions. But when we do it as an exam, it doesn't really show your creativity, you know. So be careful. You can take one incident, okay? One thing you could do, Nipuni, is if you like to use an event or an incident, don't take the whole story and never take the full story or the full novel, right? What you can do is within brackets at the end of your creative essay, say, this story was inspired by Pride and Prejudice. This story was inspired by what happened to, I don't know, Elizabeth Bennet in Pride and Prejudice. Then you are giving credit, right?
Just to add a bit to that,
Yeah.
Emily, I think if you sort of use stuff from known novels or whatever, you lose marks on creativity, originality.
That's the thing. That's what I was thinking, right? Right, Fatima, you don't have to provide morals, okay? This is not a moral story. The short story is not a moral story. It's something to make you think. It can even be an immoral story in the traditional, in a conventional sense. It can be an immoral story. It can be about a prostitute. You can write about a prostitute, but that prostitute will not be judged as a bad woman, but the prostitute can be seen as someone who is bringing out things that are wrong in society that made her into a prostitute, for example. It's always, yes, I think, Hiba, you have to use the format for the report particularly. The report is defined by the format. So have a title, I forgot to talk about the title, give it a nice title. Okay, so don't just say deforestation. Give it a longer title, steps to prevent deforestation, or the situation of deforestation in the country, in Sri Lanka, or something like that. Okay. Yes, Shainia, it's good as if you can refer to the director, not necessarily the producer, but directed by, and you don't have to write a whole paragraph on the director is so-and-so, producer is so-and-so, main actor is so-and-so, main actress is so-and-so. You can weave it into your discussion. So if you're referring to the main actor, put the main actor's name within brackets next to his film name, right? Show us a sample review, or please tell a website we can find sample reviews. I think if you Google film reviews, you can see a lot. But I don't have samples written by good students, unfortunately. Some possible reports for I think most of these topics we talked about for the factual essay can easily be given as a report as well. Okay, thank you. Awesome lesson. Thank you very much. Actually, very good question. Thanks, Mithila. You can use graphs and charts, but you can, you don't need to. Of course, don't make up graphs and charts. When you talk about graphs and charts, that suggests that we know a lot of statistics. We have remembered a lot of facts and figures, right? So I don't think they're necessary. Unless you can use diagrams or anything you like. It's nice to have visuals. Visual aids are nice, but as I said before, having graphs and charts means you have to remember a lot of numbers, right? Mev, yes, of course, you can make it a fantasy, you can make it a sci-fi, you can make it historic fiction. It doesn't matter as long as it works. Okay. Can we practice one plot and change it according to the question in the exam? I don't know, child. I have never practiced.
The examiners will see through it. I can
Yeah,
assure you.
right.
No, and also just to add to this film review thing, because I think the title is compulsory. You need to put a title for the film.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Shashi. Yeah. So don't forget the title when you're doing.
Yeah, and
so the
don't
title has
also
to be
make
based.
up.
Right. Title has to be based on what you're writing. No.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the thing is, some people make up film titles and sort of, invent films. That is a no-no.
Really. Yeah. Please don't invent films. Please don't invent books. Please, I don't think it's a good idea to invent like experts' names.
Yes.
Don't invent reports from the UN.
Environment Commission.
Yes. Can a review be in the first person? Very good question, Devmini. I don't know. Shashi, can you tell us?
Well, I think no, you can't, because it has to be third person. No, a review has to be third person. I know a site where they actually write very, very brutal film reviews, but you can get an idea of how to review a film. That's not a format to follow. Rotten Tomatoes has a good repository of film reviews. They're brutal. We don't expect that kind of film reviews, but you can get an idea of what to review in a film.
Right. And I think it's good to read Rotten Tomatoes for how they kind of destroy a film, how they say a film is bad. And also don't use that language, because Rotten Tomatoes writes very colloquial. It's for, online
that language
chatting.
is not to be followed, definitely. But it will give you an idea of what aspects of a film to look at.
Right. I'm just typing there. Okay, so Rotten Tomatoes is a website. It has very negative reviews written very colloquially, both of which you should avoid, but it will give you an idea of what aspects of a film that you can review or analyze or comment on. What type of, no, darling, you can decide on the film. They will give you a theme, right? So if you have seen a historic film that has the theme in it, you can write about it. If you have seen only thing you have to avoid is things like TV series. Don't use TV series, don't use teledramas if they say a film, right? That's something that students do. You need to avoid that. It has to be a full-length film, right? It can even be, a Japanese manga film, as long as it's a film.
Yeah, it doesn't matter whether it's manga or whether it's one of those foreign language films, as long as it adheres to the theme that is specified and discusses what the question asks you. So I think last year or the year before, they were talking about ethnic and religious aspects. So the film has to address those ethnic and religious aspects.
Okay. Right. So in conclusion, I think I will leave you to do the conclusion. Tell me what you learned today, right? I don't think we will go into this, but you do it for yourself. And I will quickly share our schedule with you. Let me stop sharing for a moment and stop sharing this. And so you say?
Not yet.
Not yet. Never mind. That's okay. I will just tell you that tomorrow I think we will be having Miss Vaidehi, not I think, we will be having Miss Vaidehi, and she will be discussing what, Shashi? Now I have forgotten.
Writing answers to context questions.
That's right. She'll be doing context questions. She probably won't go as late as this. She'll probably finish in about an hour and a bit. And then on Wednesday, Dr. Shashi and I will discuss how to answer the unseen questions. Dr. Shashi will do the poem. I will do the prose, and then we'll have a like this. We'll have a question and answer session where you can ask any questions. And if you have any questions for the essay again, maybe we can take them up. But I think I covered the essay. Yeah.
There is a question about how long should the essay be.
I talked about that earlier.
Yeah. And I mean, it's all very subjective about how fast you can write, how big your handwriting is, how comfortable you are at the exam, how rickety your
I
chair
said
is.
all that.
Exactly.
Yeah, how stressed you are and how much in a hurry you are, because then your handwriting will get big and drawn out because you're writing very quickly. So don't worry about the length in terms of pages, I would say. I would advise you not to worry too much about the page numbers. Of course, don't write too short, don't write too long. One thing you can remember is that you're not given extra marks for length, right? As long as it's relevant. It has to be relevant. It has to be comprehensive. It has to be relevant. So don't head up your answers because you think, my God, I can't stop at 2.5 pages. I have said everything I have to say, but let me pad it up. I'll give you a nice observation, which you should remember. Often now, I haven't marked A-level papers for a while, but I think Dr. Shashi will also confirm with me. Sometimes when students write, they run out of time for the last question, especially in the literature paper. Then they write it to the last question you're left with only a bit of time. You write to the point very clearly, and that is your best answer. You end up, and it's shorter. Usually you get more marks for that. Okay. So just think about that. So try to reduce the time you have. Just practice writing answers at top speed. Okay. Because then you will only say what is really relevant and necessary.
There is one question then.
Okay, chat
no, I
has got
think they are sending it to me. Are we allowed to change the fate of a character of a certain well-known book or movie, or even change the plot overall for a creative essay? I think you answered this. No, see, the thing is, to answer this Zumra's question, if you change the fate of a character or if you change the plot slightly for a creative essay, that is where your originality is compromised, because the examiners will also know that you have changed the fate of a character of a well-known book or have changed the plot slightly. So you have to bear the consequences, I would say. For context, do you have a page limit? No. Can you use a rhetorical question as a title for a report? Usually reports don't have rhetorical questions as a title. Yeah. Okay. I don't know. Have we lost Dinali, Rasika?
It seems, ma'am, I think maybe a signal problem.
Yeah. Can we close it then?
Yeah, sure, ma'am. Thank you very much. I extend my sincere thanks to Dr. Shashikala Salla and Madam Dinali Fernando for conducting a very comprehensive, detailed session with questions and answers. And you dedicated your time for the benefit of all the students who are doing GCA level examination this year. Thank you very much, dear madams, and looking forward to meet all tomorrow at 8 o'clock, 8 p.m. for the next session, and Wednesday as well. Have a nice
Thank you very
day.
much.
Good
Thank you, Akka.
night. Good night. Good night, everyone.